Dr. Goetz, are you with us? Dr. Goetz? Dr. Goetz, are you here? I see his name, but I'm not getting any response. Dr. Goetz, are you in attendance?
I am now in attendance. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Jimmy, for doing that. I think we have a quorum. I will call this February 10th meeting of the Capital Improvement Advisory Committee meeting to order at 3:07 p.m. February 10th. Everyone was sent the minutes. And I'll entertain a motion or to accept those or any corrections.
I make a motion.
Billy so moved. Joe Hurt seconds. Any other discussions? All in favor, aye?
Aye. Aye.
Okay. Discuss the funding of the past new development infrastructure. In the package that we were sent earlier, there's some very interesting graphics. I'm going to turn it over to Michael and Tom and let them and any of their staff that they need to have involved in the discussion of that. But this goes to our questions about how things have been funded in the past. And so take it away, please, Vanessa or Michael.
Mr. Landgraf, I'll start off, and thank you for everyone's time and commitment to this process. I know it seems like it's a lot of information, but you guys are doing some really good work, and you're asking all the right questions. And among those questions, rightfully, was how has the city funded new development projects in the past? And that was a direct question you asked us the last time we met. And so I say we, certainly it wasn't me or Tom, it was Vanessa and Cindy, Farah and Gayla that worked on this. But they went back, Mr. Chairman, and they looked at all of the past projects for the last 15 years. You were provided a chart, and I think you were provided a breakdown of those projects. But this is a culmination of a lot of work, a lot of research. But again, I think you guys asked the right question, and rightfully so. You should know how we funded the projects in the past. I won't go into that level of detail. At this point, I'll hand it over to Vanessa, and she'll walk you, Vanessa or Cindy, and they'll walk you through this graph that will graphically show you where we've funded projects in the past, how we've been able to do so. And I think you'll see that there is one glaring way that we've done that, and that may still be the way we do it. Vanessa, you want to take it over?
Yes. So if you guys can see my screen, you can see what was sent out to you all in the packet, which is the slide that breaks down and creates a graph of where all of our funding has come for the major projects and development that we've done, the new development in the last 15 years. And you can see that about 91% of that has been through debt issuance. And these are just the numbers that I pulled from the detail that was sent as a separate PDF that outlined the specific project name along with the funding source, and then how much for each funding source for each project. And so what I did was I just compiled that information into an easier graph to kind of show you holistically what that looked like. And if you see the total for the last 15 years of new development came out to about 23,664,000. Out of that amount, 21.4 million was all done through debt issuance. We did have some smaller projects that were done through funding sources such as supplemental general construction and water and sewer general construction. Looking at the current and future projects that we have, the total of that is 35.9 million. All of that is 100% out of debt issuance. That's the COs that we issued back in 2019. And just as a side note, out of that specific 35.9 million that was funded out of debt issuance, a lot of that was just for design of the projects. 3 of those projects that are funded for design, we have an estimated cost of construction to be about $47 million.
One thing that I like to point out is that the past 15 years, that cumulative total has been 23 million. Out of this one debt issuance that we did in 2019, for new development projects, we've already got funding of $35 million. So that this one year will eclipse all of the prior years in terms of dollars funded. And as Vanessa mentioned, if you look at what's currently under design and not funded and funded, that's about $47 million worth of projects, all through debt, and probably will be debt rather.
Is that 47 in addition to the 35?
Yes, John, that's the 47 million that is estimated for construction of projects, for example, like Dawn 56 and South Dixie, which currently are only funded for design out of the 35.9 million.
Okay, got you. Thank you.
The debt issuance was what, 90 million?
91.
Yeah.
Was
So,
93
we-
million.
93.
so 93 million has already been indebted, and 23 million over the last 15 years. So that makes, what, 116 million or something like that?
Well, a lot of the debt that's been in the past, Dr. Goetz, was used for things other than new development. You know, a lot of it was used for repair and maintenance, fire stations, you know, different projects. But we were just breaking down what was considered new development.
Yeah, I know. That's what I was, but that's.
Okay. So in the 93 million that we just issued, a portion of it went to fire stations, the animal control. So the amount that is going towards new development is the 35.9 million.
And that, only that 35.9 million would be something that would be subject to impact fees had we had impact fees or anything. The rest of that, obviously fire station, animal shelter, reconstruction, would not be subject to impact fees. So that's why you broke this out, so that we're looking at apples and apples as best we can.
Yes.
Okay, thank you, Cindy.
Uh-huh.
Okay, does anybody have any, I think that answers a lot of the, or is the information that we needed, that we were asking about last time. Does anybody on the committee have any other questions or want to analyze this anymore before we get into the impact fee presentation by Kimley Horn? Everybody good with that info? Okay, good. Joe, you good?
Yes, I'm good.
All right. Let's move on then. Thank you very much, Vanessa, Michael, and Cindy, for that information. I think that helps us paint the picture. I didn't have any idea it was going to be all purple and 91% debt. I'm a little surprised at that, but that's good to know.
I wasn't surprised, John.
Oh, well, you were in there raising your hand, so you had to have known. I mean, I knew we did a lot, but I didn't realize those percent. I thought the water and sewer fund contributed quite a bit more to capital improvements than it is.
I think Cindy can answer that question.
Okay, so there is, I mean, in our operating budget, we have money that goes towards the repair and replacement of deterioration stuff. It's not a very large budget, and we're trying to increase that as we go along. So most of any major repairs and replacements, meter, valve issues, all of those types of things have been done out of, debt issuance as well. We did a big issue back in 2007, and that did a lot of the things, for water and sewer that were needed. And so that money is basically gone now. There was some new stuff, new development out of that issuance, but a lot of it went to, major repairs and replacements.
Okay. Good. All right. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Let's get into the impact fee study presentation. Kimberly Horn, I'll just turn it over in general and y'all decide how you want to break that up. Take it away.
Perfect. Thank you, John. Well, we're going to get started with the presentation today. I think we sent you a lot of information on Friday. I think that got out. What you got in there was a copy of the presentation, made some slight tweaks to it, and a copy of the report. Our goal today is for the first few minutes that we go through is going to be a recap of kind of what we talked about in the first 2 minutes. So we're going to go through that relatively fast. But if you have any questions, let me know. And then we're going to dive into the details of the study, answer any questions you have on the study, try to simplify the study you have. And then we're going to go through the process. So I'm going to share my screen with you now that I've kind of gone over the agenda. And if anyone's not on mute, I get a pretty bad echo, so feel free to go on mute. All right, let me get this rolling. All right. There we go. You should be able to see my screen now. And I'm gonna have April monitor, so if you have a question, feel free to interrupt me or wave your hand at me if you know how to do that. But as I mentioned, we're gonna go through the role of the CIC, the process, and the concepts. That's gonna be relatively quick, just to make sure I'm a big fan of everyone seeing it a few times, so it sinks in. It's a complicated topic and it takes a few times to see it. Then we're gonna spend the bulk of our time going over the calculations. And hopefully as we go through the calculation, it explains the report that you received Friday. And then we're gonna go over the remaining schedule. So just remember, during the adoption process, you have 3 roles really to look at. One is the land use assumptions in the capital improvements plan. That's what we covered in the last meeting that y'all reviewed. And then also to review the impact fees, and that's what we're doing today. So for the process, there's a planning step, an analysis step, a policy step, and an adoption step. So where we're at right now is kind of right in the middle of that. We've finished the analysis. We haven't started the policy discussion. And really today is to help you walk through the analysis. I just want to let you know today is y'all's meeting, and it's to answer questions on our analysis. We can talk about some of the rates and what we call the policy step, establishing the impact fee, but there's no action today. Today is really to explain the report to you, to go through and understand, to make sure that y'all are on board with the calculations in the report. We will be presenting the results, and that always leads to some discussion on rates and what other cities are doing, et cetera. But today is really an informational meeting and a discussion meeting to get questions and ideas from you and maybe next steps. So just to recap what y'all worked on last time, that y'all have recommended to go move forward to council at their next meeting, when we have the meeting for council, is the 10-year growth assumptions. This is a map of the growth assumptions and the various rates we assumed across the city that y'all have seen previously, really with an overall growth rate of 1.3%. We looked at the water service areas, and the map that you see in front of you is a recap of the water service area, the wastewater service area, and then the roadway service area. And really why we walk through this is to remind everyone the roadway service areas are split into 3 service areas. Service area 1 being on the northwest, 2 being on the southwest, and 3 being on the east side of town. And for the roadway side, each service area acts as its own little area in the study, so they're all independent of each other. We also worked through the capital improvements plan. What you see in front of you is the water and wastewater capital improvements plan. These are based on the master plans that were adopted a few years ago. And this is the recommendation exhibit for the growth of the water and wastewater CIP. We worked through roadway. As I mentioned, there's 3 different roadways. One of the unique features I'll mention about roadway is that we broke up the roadway into new projects and widening projects. and new projects are roads that don't exist on the ground today, and widening projects are roads that exist on the ground today that are widened in the future. But there's a different capital improvement plan for each service area for roadway. A little bit about the impact fee concepts. So what are impact fees? Just a reminder, they're one-time fee for new development. So only new development, new growth pays for these, and it's paid one time. The purpose of it, and a little bit to the presentation earlier, is really to recover infrastructure costs to reserve future development. So the whole reason impact fees is for growth to pay for growth. And really what it's a legal way to collect a flexible fee for infrastructure. Really what this means is the city can collect money and spend money on the high priority projects within that service area. So sometimes a development may come in an area that there's not infrastructure needed, but the fee can be collected and spent on money that where infrastructure is needed. So it's actually the only legal way in Texas to collect a flexible fee for infrastructure. Just a reminder that other states have a bunch of other impact fees, police, fire, parks. Texas state statute doesn't have that. There's roadway, water, wastewater. Texas has drainage. Most cities don't have drainage because most subdivision ordinance require you to detain on site or not impact the flow. So if you're actually not impacting off site, there's really no impact to the system. There's a few cities that don't have that, that have regional stormwater detention areas that do have a drainage impact fee. But for now, for Odessa, we're looking at roadway, water, and wastewater only. Just a reminder of what we included in those capital improvement plans. Those were capacity related projects. So you think of roads to serve future growth. So if it's a roadway project, it's a widening project for more lanes. It's an intersection improvement. It's a turn lane project. For water, it's increasing your water size or a new water line or a new pump station that has extra capacity. We can also include debt service. We'll talk about that a little bit in the calculation, and all the costs that's associated with producing that project. What we cannot include, and the most common thing, is maintenance. Maintenance is funding is not eligible. So if it's a pothole, we can't replace the pothole. If it's an existing 8-inch line that breaks, we can't break that 8-inch line. Or I think Tom was talking earlier about a 30-inch line that breaks. We can't go back and use impact fee funds to break that, to repair that line. We can't upgrade to serve existing developments, and through our calculation, we're capturing that. We're making sure we're not upgrading for existing demand. Another thing is when you implement the program, the administrative costs of operating the program can't be used impact fees. And the reason behind that in the Texas statute is all the money that's collected from developments goes towards a project capacity improvement, not the staff time. It can go for design, it can go for right away, but it goes towards a specific project. So that was a very quick overview of the last 3 meetings we had with you, just to give everyone a refresher of what we talked about previously. If there aren't any questions, I'll jump into the weeds of the study and kind of go over how the study pans out. Okay, not hearing any, we're going to jump into the study. So the previous presentation, which we just went over, was all the assumptions. This presentation, we're going to go into a concept called service units. We're going to dive into the calculations. We're going to look at some sample calculations and go over the comparisons from some various cities. So first, service units. Service units, the Chapter 395 definition is it's the way to measure the consumption attributable to a development. So how do we actually calculate everything? For water and wastewater, this is fairly common. It is a meter size. The bigger your meter, the more you pay. They're related to each other. For roadway, it's a concept called vehicle mile. And I will explain in detail both of these concepts on the coming slides. So on the utility side for water and wastewater, we define a base meter. The base water meter is a 3/4 inch. So that's the base meter that we're going to use for water and wastewater. For roadway, as I mentioned before, it's one vehicle travels 1 mile. And we'll explain how you calculate that in a moment. Going back to water and wastewater, the base meter was a 3/4 inch. We say that's a typical house. If you think of a 2-inch meter, that may be a typical shopping center. These are just examples. Every shopping center might have a different size meter. But when you think about, if you're using the 3/4 inch meter for a single family house, that really comes out to 5 1/3 meters. So a 2-inch meter would cost 5 1/3 of a 3/4 inch meter. Or a shopping center with a 2-inch meter is the same dollar amount as a 5 1/3 single family houses. So there's a conversion factor that that basically based on the flow that's allowed through a 3/4 inch meter, 2-inch meter, we're calculating the amount of capacity that you're buying from the system on an impact fee. So that is how service units work. So there's a table that shows different meter sizes, and they all rank back to a factor that equates to the 3/4 inch meter. For roadway, it's a little bit longer calculation. We look at two variables: trip generation and trip length. Traffic studies and traffic engineers like myself use a manual called the IT Trip Generation Manual. It studies across the US, and they figure out average rates that a typical development generates. So in a typical hour, how much traffic does a single family home generate? How much traffic does a shopping center generate, et cetera? So they calculate the trip generation, and then they use the trip length. There's National Household Travel Surveys. So if you ever get those surveys from the government that ask you to fill in something, how far do you travel from work? How long does it take you to get to work? That information is used for traffic engineers and transportation planners to understand trip length. There's also legal requirements from Chapter 395 of the maximum trip length we can actually assess the development. And in reality, in places like Texas, most of the trip lengths that are in Chapter 395 cap us at our trip length. And you'll see that in a little bit. When you start thinking about the trips you make and the length you take in those trips, you'll see that we're capped in a lot of places, that we're actually just defaulting back to the legal requirements on the trip length. In some cases, we're not. For example, like a gas station, you probably don't drive very far, so that trip length is less. But the two examples we show you, you'll see they're capped. So these are and just to let you know, you'll never have to do these calculations again if you don't want to. If this was to move forward to get adopted, we put a spreadsheet together where if someone's building a single family home, these calculations are done in the background, but we want to make sure you understand the basics behind the calculations so that you can see it. A single family home, that IT Trip Generation Manual I discussed, generates 0.99 trips in the PM peak. An average home, when you take a neighborhood, if there were 200 homes in the neighborhood, they would generate 200 times 0.99 trips. That's the average. It used to be 1. It was a lot easier when it was 1, but now it's 0.99. The trip length is 3 miles, as I mentioned. That's coming straight from the statute. So if you think about 3 miles, that's the maximum trip length we're assessing in Odessa at this time. So if you think about your home to work trip, you might travel longer than 3 miles. Actually, that trip length represents half your trip. So we would think about a 6 mile trip length. You probably travel potentially longer than 6 miles on average. So the way we calculate that is 0.99 times 3 equals 2.97 vehicle miles. So every single family home on average in Odessa is generally 2.97 vehicle miles. And so what we're calculating is the cost per vehicle mile. And we'll show you that calculation in a minute. Shopping center, it's a very similar calculation, except the one difference is on single family, it's based on dwelling units. On shopping center, it's based on square footage. So for every 1,000 square feet, it generates 3.81 trips. Well, if you build a shopping center, not every trip is going to that shopping center. I think we all, drive home from work and want to stop somewhere on the way home. Or a big example is, on the way to work, if you want to go to a coffee shop, you might stop at a Starbucks on the way in. Well, those are called pass-by trips. Those aren't really new trips. Those are trips on the road that people are just stopping in on the way out. Well, on a typical shopping center, that's about 34% of the trips. So based on the manual, 2.45 trips. Again, 3 miles for trip length, 7.53 vehicle miles. So these are the conversion factors. So if you think about it, one single family home generates 2.97 vehicle miles. 1,000 square feet of shopping center generates 7.53 vehicle miles. So if you think about it, for every 2,000 or so, it takes about 2 single family homes, a little more than 2 single family homes, to equivalent 1,000 square feet of a shopping center. If you were trying to compare the two to each other. Now, these aren't the only 2 land uses we have on the transportation side. On the water and wastewater side, it's relatively easy. We're using meter. Land use doesn't necessarily matter from a technical calculation. It could from a policy calculation, but from a technical calculation, it doesn't matter. From the roadway side, we have about 40 different land uses. So we'll show you a snippet of that table later. These are just 2 examples. So we are trying to nail down the vehicle miles as specific to that development as possible. So that's a very complicated topic, but we'll describe a little bit more of this topic later. I'll move on to impact fee calculations. So one of the graphs that we use is try to understand from a high level impact fee calculations, and then we'll dive into actually a little bit more detail. When we do the calculations, the formula at the top looks like a relatively simple formula with a lot of variables. Recoverable costs of the capital improvement plan plus financing costs divided by new service units of demand. What does that mean? It's cost by growth, cost divided by growth in simple words. But that recoverable cost of the CIP is very important. The word recoverable means only the amount of growth related to growth. So if you think about the total supply of the CIP, we showed you those CIPs that you looked at earlier. Well, not all that CIP is a recoverable cost. There's actually an existing demand in that CIP, which is shown at the bottom of this chart. There's the recoverable cost, and then there's the additional demand. So that's important. The only element that we're using for the numerator is this recoverable cost. Then we add the financing, then we divide by the growth. So that's just to think of a pie of how we are dividing this up. I'm going to start with water and wastewater. If you recall last time, we presented the water and wastewater CIPs, and we showed, I think, roughly 20 something projects on each. The water CIP totaled $55.4 million, and the wastewater CIP was $89 million. That's a large CIP. Well, we can only recover the cost of that CIP attributable to growth in the next 10 years. So we looked at your growth projections, we looked at the water and wastewater model, and the percentage, and every project has a slightly different percentage. If you dive into the study, you'll see every project's a little bit different percentage, but it came out to roughly $5 million over the next 10 years to cover that growth for water, and wastewater is 9.7 million. So out of the total CIP that you saw before, the recoverable cost that's the cost that we can actually assess to future development. The other 50 million is either beyond the 10-year window or existing demand, et cetera. Now, we looked at financing costs based on rates that our financial subconsultant worked with the finance department to establish. Now, that 1.9 million is only the financing cost on the 5 million. We're not looking at the financing cost on the 55 million. It's just the financing cost on the recoverable cost. However, as you collect impact fees, you are earning interest on those money, and state law requires us to recognize that you're earning interest on the money. So we're subtracting the interest on the money, and we made some assumptions for that. So if you look at the total recoverable cost of the impact fee CIP plus financing, that is that's an important number. That's 6.6 million. So we went from 5.1 million to 6.6 million. That's really calculating for that financing cost, or 9 million to 12 million. But then we call it pre-credit, $880 and $18.51. That's called the pre-credit service unit. State law gave us two options. We could cut that number in half, if you will, or we could do a credit calculation. We did a credit calculation. This is really to avoid that double dip if you're paying ad valorem and if you're paying taxes, so you're not double dipping. We took out $775,000 and $1.2 million to get us the true recoverable costs plus financing plus ad valorem credit. And if you look at the bottom number, it's what's highlighted in yellow. It's the 5.9 million and the 10.8 million divided by the service units. And that's those growth projections we talked about last time. So what does this mean when you get to it? $778 for a 3/4 inch base meter. Some people refer that $778 for a single family equivalent unit, because that's what we're assuming it to be, or $1662 for wastewater. So at the end of the calculation, that is the current draft results we have for the water impact fee side. Lots of numbers in front of you, but we wanted to walk you through that calculation because there may be some questions that evolve from this group.
I have one. You say under wastewater, 1,662 for a 3/4 inch base. That you really mean a 4-inch service tap for sewer, don't you?
Well, so that we base the water. Sorry, we base the wastewater on the water meter.
Okay.
So it's you would pay the wastewater based on the water meter you pull.
Okay, all right, I understand. Okay.
That's an excellent clarification I did not mention. So
no, okay, all right, I understand though. You pay two fees, one for your water and one for sewer, but they're based on the 3/4 inch meter or the square footage when it comes to the commercial.
Yes.
Okay, all right. I apologize. Go ahead.
Yeah, and one thing that just a note for clarification is some houses might have 2 water meters. You would pay, they may have an irrigation meter. You would pay for the irrigation meter, the water meter, but you only pay one wastewater fee. You don't pay that twice. So that's a subtle difference on if you have an irrigation meter. So very similar calculation for roadway. We showed you the projects last time. I have each service area. I'm going to use service area 1 just as the example because it's the first on the list. The total CIP cost was $69 million. We went through the recoverable cost. There's a few more steps on the recoverable cost that I'm skipping through, but we looked at and we took out the existing demand. We took out the beyond the 10-year growth. Just look at the 10-year growth for the next 10 years was $23 million. So we're estimating roughly 23 million in service area 1 to accommodate the next 10-year growth. Similar as financing costs on the 23 million minus the interest earnings to get us to $30 million. The vehicle mile costs, so if you remember those vehicle miles I talked about earlier, we projected those growth, converted them to vehicle miles, and developed the vehicle miles. We did a credit for ad valorem taxes. So at the end of the day, the total recoverable cost of the impact fee CIP plus financing plus ad valorem credit was roughly 28.5 million for service area 1. You divide that by 10,000 vehicle miles, that comes out to 27.26 per vehicle mile. One of the items that you may be thinking when you think about the service areas, and we'll show you a slide on the service areas, there's a lot of variables that go into this factor. There's the amount of project cost. So you can see service area 3, it's got a lot more project costs. And if you look at the 10-year recoverable costs, it's $10 million more in service area 1, but there's also more growth shown in service area 3. So it's a combination of cost and growth. So when you start thinking about the dollars that come out and the calculation, think it's both a variable of cost and growth. So that's just important to remember as you're looking through these. So I'm a map person. So like, what did we just summarize? And we can go back to any of these slides. We're going to take a break in a second and make sure that you answer any other questions you may have. But water and wastewater is it's service area wide, $778 for the 3/4 inch meter, the base meter, and then $1162 for the wastewater. And then the roadway service area, I showed it table wise and I showed it map wise. And I'm going to explain what that means, vehicle mile means on a sample calculation in a minute. So I'm going to show you the sample calculation. So this is the table that you often see. Again, we build a spreadsheet to help calculate this if this was to move forward. But for water and wastewater, these are the spreadsheets. So if you were to pull a 1 1/2 inch meter, it would be $25.93 for water, $5,540 for wastewater. As we discussed earlier, this 3/4 inch, the common, the 3/4 inch meter, the common single family meter would be the top line, 778 and 1662. So these are just common accessible. It's a pretty easy on what water. It's a table. You find out what meter you pull. You can scroll across. You see the calculation. The multiplier is in the second column that you see, and you can find your fee relatively easy. So this is just an example. And what we're thinking is that the general office building is the 1 1/2 inch meter. So we're kind of talking a 10,000 square foot office building. This might be the fee that you see for water and wastewater impact fee on a 10,000 square foot office building. For roadway,
On
Yep.
hold up, on a 300 unit apartment complex, it might have a 6-inch meter. Then you just would go straight to the 6-inch meter.
Yep.
And the sewer and the water on that.
Yep.
Just straight across. Okay.
Yep. Or some apartment complexes might have 2 4-inch meters or something, 2 3-inch
Exactly.
meters. You would do the same thing.
Okay. Gotcha.
Roadway is gonna be a little different, so I'll hit that apartment complex in a section. But for water and wastewater, it's just about the number of meters. So just calculate the number of meters on your site plan, whatever that may be, and you match them up with these tables. For roadway, we have a land use equivalency vehicle mile table. There's about 40 land uses in that table. And really, this is the calculations of the table. I showed you single family already. So if you look at this line, there's that 0.99 I talked about earlier. There's the trip length that I talked about earlier. We're capping ourselves at 3. The research showed that the average trip in Odessa was 6.2. We cut that in half because we only charge half the trip. Because if you think about it, if you leave somewhere, if you're leaving your house or going somewhere, we call that origin and destination. So we don't account for both origin and destination. It comes to 3.1, but we capped everything at 3 miles. So if you think about your trip from home to work, kind of relate that on, or your friend's trip, does that 6.2 seem reasonable? That's based on the data we have, but we capped it at 3 instead of 3.1. So it comes out to 2.9. We do that calculation for everything. So the one I'll point out here is multifamily mid-rise. And all these have definitions in the report as well. Multifamily mid-rise is your typical apartment complex. So if you think about your typical apartment complex, it's 1.32. So it's less than a single family. Now, if you think about an apartment complex, there's more apartment units per acre. So per acre, there may be more vehicle miles, but per unit, it's much lower trip generator than your typical single family house. Not quite a third, but about 40 something percent. So that's just an example, but there's about 40 land uses on this. And in the report, we try to define those the best we can. There's not always a perfect definition for these, but as I mentioned earlier, the multifamily mid-rise is at least 3 dwelling units between 3 and 10 stories. The low-rise is like your townhomes. So we try to define each of those in the report, and those are on page 55, 4 and 55 of the report. So when you calculate the roadway, there's a 3-step process. Step 1 is we got to determine what the development unit is and the service unit. Step 2 is what's the maximum fee. Step 3 is the maximum accessible fee. Ultimately, there might be a step 4, which is a policy decision, because not every city adopts the maximum fee. But I'm just showing you the maximum fees at this point in time. So we're showing the 10,000 square foot office building like we showed on the water and wastewater. So remember, I mentioned that the development unit is 1,000 square feet. So there are 10 units of 1,000 square feet. So your number of development units is 10. Your vehicle miles is 3.45. If you go back and look at that table, it'd be 3.45. Grab the maximum accessible fee, and I'm using service area 1, which just for record is the largest service area dollar amount that we calculated. Service area 2 and 3 is lower than this, but I'm showing you service area 1. If you calculate the maximum accessible fee for roadway improvements on a 10,000 square foot shopping center, it would be 10 times 3.4 times 2,726, which would be $94,047. That would be the maximum accessible fee that's legally allowed to charge. Step 4 would be whatever rate decision that the council would decide to make, or this body decides to recommend. But this is the step-by-step calculation. So I'm gonna run through it one more time because it's important to understand. On office, it's square footage, so it's number of 1,000 square feet. And some communities I work with, instead of using the 1,000 square feet, use per square foot. The reason we use it per 1,000 square feet, that's how IT does everything. But this math would work the same. So there's 10 development units, multiply that by that 3.45. So if you imagine and you remembered our example from shopping center, if this was a shopping center, that would be 7.53. Multiply it by the maximum fee, and that's how you get the number amount. And we're going to show you other examples as well. But before I go along, I want to stop here. I covered a lot of the technical elements. After here, we have a lot of examples and comparisons. So I want to take a break at this moment, see if you had any questions on the technical, any clarifications you needed. All right, I don't see any questions. So I think just to let y'all know, as a committee, I've done this for a lot of communities. A lot of the questions come when we show the results and comparisons, everything. So it's not uncommon. So now we're going to show you some comparisons. I'm going to first start with single family detached housing. And the first thing I have to point on the slide is, for comparison purposes, we are showing our calculated maximum fees. Every other city is showing the adopted city fees. So they may not have adopted their actual calculated maximum. And the reason it's difficult to track that down is it's very hard for us to go through ordinances and realize what their actual maximum fee. All we really can find out is what they actually adopted in many cases. So if you have questions on what cities decided to do from a adoption standpoint, I can answer those pretty heavily for Denton, Midland, and Lubbock, because I was involved in those studies. For Waco, I've only read about, I don't know, I wasn't directly involved in. We also included cities with no impact fees. These are other cities that are on the list. Abilene, San Angelo, El Paso, Amarillo, Wichita Falls do not have impact fees. They get infrastructure built in other manners, currently like Odessa does today. So one of the things I'll point out as you look at this graph is water and wastewater is the same in Odessa because it's the same service area. So those don't change. And when you look at Midland, Waco, and Denton, you see it's relatively the same. What we see a lot commonly on water and wastewater, and I'll just say this anecdotally, is the study results typically are adopted. They come out, in most cases, they adopt the study results. The one exception is Lubbock. You may ask, why doesn't Lubbock have it? Lubbock made the policy decision not to adopt water and wastewater. They actually adopted it at a $0 rate. They adopted roadway. They did not adopt water and wastewater. They adopted it at $0. So that's why you don't see a rate on that. And we can discuss later why they adopted it at 0 if you want to go down that route. But this is comparison. One of the things to note is every city does a little bit different. calculation. As I mentioned earlier, the credit for ad valorem taxes we actually calculated. In some cities, they don't take the time to calculate that ad valorem tax. They just cut the fee in half. That's an option state law allows, but the credit is really more like 10%, not 50%. So when you look at all of them, this is the this is the rate that they adopted. So this is single family home.
Jeff,
Yep.
Jeff, before you move on to that, I know you guys did Midland. What was Midland's total maximum fee that they could charge? I know they halved it, but where were they initially?
They adopted roughly the 50% number. They're a little less, but so almost if you doubled that, that would have been their pre 50% number. I'll get that exact answer in a minute for you, Michael, but it's roughly double that.
Just a rough estimate was fine, Jeff.
Yeah, roughly double that. So like if you look at service area 1 in Odessa, which is around $10,500, if Midland hadn't halved it, they would have been approximately total dollar amount the same area you were.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Yep, good question. But these are their actual rates that they're collecting. Now note, just to let you know, if you go to Midland's website and start plugging in calculators and trying to do comparison, Midland has 4 service areas. This is the average of the 4 service areas. So and Denton has the same thing. Denton has multiple service areas. So we are showing the average rates that are collected in those service areas. So in Midland, each service area varies slightly for roadway, but they're all relatively close. So I just want to let you know, these are the average in case you are familiar with their fees. Multifamily and mid-rise, very similar graph. A lot of times what you'll see is cities on the residential side, they follow very similar strategies between single family and multifamily. So this is an example of multifamily development. This is a little I'm trying to remember. Do you remember how many? I have to default to April real quick. Do you remember what the number of units we planned for this multifamily development? I could pull it up on my spreadsheet. I just went blank.
I believe we used 1.32 for the roadway.
I meant number of dwelling units.
Oh. I would have to pull that up. 200
or 400 or.
Yeah, that's what I'm verifying that. I didn't put it on the slide. So let me get that information to you. We use the same for all of them, but it might be, we might have assumed 1, but that would be, we may need to update this slightly to show like a more of a 200 unit, because to John's point earlier is that the water and wastewater base inch meter serves multiple units while the roadway may just show 1 unit. So we show 1 unit for roadway and we show the base meter for multiplied, but it would be per unit of the cost of roadway. So like in Lubbock, it's $569 per dwelling unit. Midland, this is the per dwelling unit, but the water and wastewater spreads over multiple dwelling units, if that makes sense. Office, generally speaking, the reason most of the time cities make the same decision on residential generates a certain amount of traffic. What we see on non-residential, if you drive around non-residential, you see more traffic. So you end up seeing higher dollar amounts for traffic. So a lot of the rate discussions revolve around non-residential more than residential in some cities. It depends on the topic of the time, but similar, this is the 5,000 square foot office. We show the comparison charts for roadway. Water, as in Odessa, is consistent. Then we show the various rates for Denton, Midland, Waco. And just anecdotally, because we talked about Midland a little bit, Midland, we talked about they roughly adopted 50% number. So you could look at potentially doubling that to see what that would look like with their pre-credit before they cut it in half. Denton, I can tell you if you can't tell, on water and wastewater, they adopted their full maximum fee. On roadway, they adopted a 20% number. That was their policy decision. So on water and wastewater, they went all the way, but on roadway, they didn't go quite all the way. They went at 20%. And Lubbock, you can kind of see what they didn't adopt water and wastewater, and they adopted a roadway. This is a light industrial, 50,000 square foot building, a light industrial, so a relatively large light industrial building.
Jeff, one step back, how does Lubbock finance all their water and sewer projects?
So every city's at a different
The rates or
place.
fees.
It's through their rates and fees. They had a lot of discussion. I don't want to pretend I know the CFO's. I've heard what he said is that they figured that they can cover their needs. And I want to say that they were raising the rates by like their base rate by a quarter or nickel or something. And it felt acceptable way to raise the rates as opposed to do impact fees. There was a lot of discussion between rates and impact fees is what there was.
Okay.
They were farther behind, for lack of better words. The Capital Improvements Advisory Committee and the council felt like they had more needs on roadway and were farther behind on roadway. They were actually ahead on water and wastewater. They were actually getting ahead on water and wastewater.
Okay.
So that was their discussion.
And fees could be part of our discussion with the council when we get to that type of presentation, right?
Yeah, I think Michael wanted to say something, but I think short answer is that we, we're looking for feedback on impact fees, and one of your comments could be related towards that.
Okay.
So, Michael.
So John, one of the way that Lubbock is handling that is, yeah, they've got fee increases, but they've got annual fee increases. So it's not just a one-time fee increase, but rather their plan is to fund projects over time tied to rate increases.
Okay. I'm just curious, since they didn't have anything, I wondered how they were doing that. Thank you both.
Yeah.
Sure.
And they have a major water line coming online. That's why they adopted zero, because they were a little nervous if that major water line came online that they might need other funding sources. So they went ahead and adopted, because one thing that council could do is, one thing that's important, we as the consultant are calculating the potential maximum impact fee. Council will eventually write an ordinance and adopt the collection rate associated with that. One thing that council could change, they could change the collection rate through a public hearing process. They can't ever go with above what we calculate, but if they decide to calculate to adopt X dollars today, and they say, there are a few cities we've worked with that will adopt a phased approach. Like the first 2 years, we're going to adopt this, and then we're going to crank it up 25% or something. So that's some options that cities have considered in the past. I don't think any of the cities on this list did that approach, but that is one thing that's done. So light industrial, it's the same calculation as anything else based on the meter size. You'll see the water meters in Odessa are all the same. Depending on what service area, you're different rates. What some cities have done, and these cities located here did not choose to do this, but a few of my cities have taken like service area 2 in Odessa and said, hey, we're just going to charge everyone the same, and we're going to base all our rates on service area 2. That was a policy decision, not a calculation decision, just to flatten it out. Midland, Waco, and Denton and Lubbock did not do that, but that's what some cities have done. Retail shopping center, 10,000 square foot. And those who aren't, we saw these are based on the actual cost of the CIP divided by the growth. And for those who sometimes wonder, roads are pretty expensive. That's what a lot of the debt has been issued for. To build a typical traffic signal, which is a lot of people is like, well, how much does a traffic signal cost? I always use that as my fun joke, and I get answers anywhere from $5,000 to like $1 million. Well, it's really closer to probably say $300,000 to $400,000, depending on what you have to do for the signal. So for those who didn't know how much a traffic signal costs the city, that's just kind of one of those things. That just kind of think of as your programming traffic. That's just a signal, turn lanes, roads, concrete gets expensive. So that was really the examples that we were showing you today. We wanted to open it up for a little bit of discussion. I got some schedule and next steps. I'll just dive into the schedule so you're aware of what we're thinking. Today, we wanted to review the maximum accessible fees. Really, over the next month, we're asking y'all to make sure that y'all read through the study, see if you have any more questions. You've gotten the briefer from this presentation, and then come back the next meeting, and there's really 2 actions. We kind of try to separate the 2 actions, if you will, in a whole. Is one, there's the study itself. Do you have any questions or comments in the study? And that's really the technical side, but then there's question or comments this body might have to make recommendations for council on the impact fee rates themselves. So a lot of times I try to separate those out because, we can move past the study and start talking about rates, and et cetera, because they'll need feedback on both of them. Much like you recommended to council to see the land use and CIP, we'll need to see if you recommend the study going forward, as well as what your recommendations on the rates are. So we can break those out separately as well. But we're not planning to do that action today. Our hope is next time we can meet. But we also, having experience, done impact fees before, we know that sometimes this takes multiple meetings to discuss through and go through options and get information back. We have already programmed in an additional meeting if we need it to get to your recommendation. So, we're prepared to answer and work through your questions as you see fit. So with this, I'll turn it over to John, and if you want to facilitate some discussion about where you see the study being or where you see the rates being.
Yeah, I think we just need to open it up to the committee and for questions, and make sure we all understand exactly how these were calculated and understand that calculation and how the maximums. And I don't think we need to be looking at those and comparing them to Midland, Waco, Lubbock, Denton, or anything at this point. I think the big challenge today is to understand how they were calculated, right, Jeff?
Yeah, that's hopefully what we were trying to put behind us in this meeting, and obviously introduce you to, so you all start thinking about where does Odessa need to be on the rates. And I'm always if you want to do some homework, you can get on Lubbock's got a pretty good website for impact fees. So does Midland. They both have some good websites. You can start seeing what the fees they charge. We put them on here, but we're asking maybe for the next time to come with some ideas so that we can have some good discussion in next meeting. But this meeting was really focused on the technical aspect.
Right. Anybody have any thoughts or questions, comments about that?
Jeff, on the, just going back to your things you were showing us, is a 5,000 square foot building or house. I can't remember which one it was. Yeah, a general office, 5,000 square feet. John, in Odessa, what would you say a 5,000 square foot general office would cost to build? It's $200 a square foot high, low?
No,
Office.
I think Mr. Withrow would probably say something like that's about right, isn't it, Mike?
Yeah, that's probably about right.
So that's about $1 million, right?
Right.
Yes.
All right, so we're going to charge them $51,000 on $1 million house or $1 million project.
Yeah, to build you a
Am I
new
reading-
$5,000 dentist office, that's what it costs.
Yeah, that's what I'm asking. Okay. So Midland's going to charge somebody, and I'm not comparing, I'm just looking. Midland's going to charge them $17,000. We're going to charge them let's say $50,000. Am I reading that right, Jeff? I'm just making sure I'm reading.
Yeah, that is 100% correct what this chart is showing. And one thing I'll just clarify is that, as we discussed a little bit earlier, Midland cut their rate in half. So that's not the point. This is actually what they're charging. So, but from a calculation standpoint, we calculated your needs versus growth. This is the numbers that came out. What this body and what council actually decides to charge may not be these numbers, but this is the maximum they could. This is the potential maximum they could.
Yeah, Jimmy, this is just what is allowed under the law, but obviously from a practical standpoint, that's not what we would be charging, I don't think.
Well, I'm agreeing. I'm just making sure I was looking at it correctly.
Yep. You're interpreting this correctly. So in Denton, the same thing, that's what they would charge, $39,000. That's the actual charge in Denton, in Lubbock, and Waco.
Go back to the one that showed a single family.
Right here.
That's a single family detached house. Now,
Correct.
That has nothing to do with how big the house is.
It does not. This was just detached housing. Yes.
Jeff, can you charge? I mean, there's a big difference in a tract house that Beaton Bow's building on a 50-foot by 110-foot lot that's got a 3/4 inch meter or a 1 inch meter and a custom built home that Pinnacle Homes is building on a 4,000, 5,000 square foot house. So there's a huge difference in values and ultimately demand, but there's not that big a difference in a 3/4 inch and a 1 inch water meter.
That's correct. So the water meter would change between the two, but the roadway impact fee would not change.
Right.
And
The water meter doesn't change significantly. I mean, from a 1,500 square foot house to a 5,000 square foot house, we may only be talking about going from a 3/4 inch to a 1 inch.
Yeah, and we get this question a lot, and this question came up a lot in Lubbock. And Beambo was involved in that discussion in Lubbock, so they're aware of that question as well.
Right.
So the technical side, I'll just give you the technical answers. That's what I'm here for. Is generally speaking, when you think about the larger homes and you think about the folks who live in maybe the larger homes versus smaller homes, we're thinking about pure traffic. So a lot of the starter homes, like the homes that you live out when you're 25, you have two parents working, there may be a child working, there's more traffic actually generated actually in the smaller homes. So all the research showed that, like, that's why we make it the same across the level, because all the research shown is it's relatively the same, but when you dive into the research, kind of those more tract homes actually generate slightly more traffic than the larger estate lots. So, but
In theory.
in theory, yeah.
Okay.
In theory.
But Jimmy, that's what you were trying to get to, wasn't it? Also, I mean, there is a difference there on demand of the system.
Yes, yes.
Well, I got a question. Can you vary the roadway and the wastewater fees based on S1A, S12, S13, or SA3, or any of that stuff? Because my concern is some of the areas, yeah, the traffic, I understand that variable, but you're building, in some areas you may be trying to build affordable housing, and that may impact the affordability because you may be looking at additional $2 to $3 a foot.
Yeah,
Depending.
I'm going to answer. I think you asked two questions there, Mike.
Yeah, I
I'll try to
do.
answer two questions. The first is you can absolutely vary your dollar amount by service area. So, like I mentioned earlier, some cities will use a flat rate across the service area. So they charge the same dollar amount for every house in the city. So the only way to do that is to vary the rate in each area. But you can vary by area. The second question I think you talked about was affordable housing and the goals of affordable housing. There's two things to note in there. If it's capital A affordable housing as defined by the federal government, it is not, impact fees are not paid for that by that.
Okay.
Now that's the capital A affordable housing. If you're talking about like workforce housing or, little A affordable housing, like that could be a policy decision if the city already has an affordable housing policy or something that they could look at applying that in here. That would be a policy decision though. I mean, there are some things that you can do for that. The only rules that I'll tell you is you can't charge more than what I'm showing you on the graph right now.
Jeff, Jeff, I know we broke it up into SA1, SA2, SA3. Did Waco break it up into different deals? And this is an average, or is this for every house in Waco?
No, it's there's 5 service areas in Denton, 5 in Midland. I'm not sure in Waco. I think there might be 7 in Waco. I need to verify that. And there's 9 in Lubbock.
So this is
an average.
Is an average.
This is an average, correct?
Okay, that's what I was making sure. Okay, thank you.
Mr. Landgraf, you had a question for me?
I did. You're very familiar, have been, especially with our affordable housing. Have we distinguished any different types of affordable housing that would be impacted by this?
Yes, sir. We actually defined that several years ago, Mr. Landgraf, and that's any home that is built for the sole purpose of providing affordable housing to persons earning less than 80% of median income. And we set a dollar value on that as probably it's probably moved, and I don't remember off the top of my head what it is, but at the time we did it, it was probably about $140,000. Obviously, no one can build for that price anymore. So that number moves up, but yes, we would have a definition that we would apply, what we would consider to be affordable housing.
Okay, that maybe council would say would not be subject to impact fees then.
Correct.
And John, those are the types of recommendations I think that we're also thinking that y'all might have.
Okay. All right. Yeah, I think we all need to be thinking in terms of some of those kind of things also. Okay. Keep going. Good questions, everybody.
John, along those lines, a good thing for us to maybe think about is what do we do in the case of something like a low-income housing tax credit? Apartment complex, that is.
Right.
So,
Mike, you're working on closing a bunch of those right now, aren't you?
Well, possibly, yes, sir.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's several of those. And I know they wouldn't be affected by this because this is not going to probably be in place in time for any of those. But certainly there is opportunity for more of those in the future, and how we would impact those, I think, is also. Can you set Jeff, can you set a different rate for, rather than not at all, can you set a different rate for affordable housing type of projects? Like 50% of whatever the adopted rate is for affordable?
I will say I have not done that in a city yet, but
it's either all or none.
No, I think I would have to default to your city's attorney's office a little bit on that. I think there's opportunity to vary rates. How it ties to your affordable housing policy, I haven't done that before, so I just want to make sure that we're not crossing a legal boundary. But I think it's something to consider and look into.
Okay. Well, and we're not there yet. Just something.
John, what you'd have to watch out for on that is you could actually drive your projects to certain areas if you change that.
That's why I was thinking, that's exactly right, Jimmy. That's why I was wondering about that, because you could make those only be in one of the service areas, depending on how you structured that, which may or may not be favorable. I mean, it could certainly be negative.
Yeah,
or favorable. I mean, if you reduced it in one area and did it in the other, then you drive projects potentially to that other area.
And then you could watch out being in trouble with the federal government.
Yeah, the line that most cities, and you would most likely have in your draft ordinance if it was to move forward, and this is just kind of a federal law. It says affordable housing development that qualifies for affordable housing under 42 U.S. Code 1274 as amended, and is participating in affordable housing development is exempted from roadway impact fee collection. That's what most cities have. You could potentially look at if the attorneys are okay with expanding that definition a little bit beyond the federal definition, but that would be a question that we would have to bring and answers back to you.
Okay.
And John, I think to Jeff's point is if you guys have those specific topics that you want us to bring back to you at the next meeting, we can get that information out so that we can then at the next meeting look at making what those recommendations are to the impact fees and moving forward if we keep forward.
Okay, Vanessa, I think what I'm hearing is we ought to look at what impact fees, how they can be structured according to our Odessa's definition of affordable housing, so that we're not recommending something that is not good for that or not capable to be done. So I think if you would look at that for us, that would be something we could discuss next time.
Yeah, we can bring something back to you guys at the next meeting with regard to what the impact is, what we're allowed to do statutorily, what we're allowed to do legally, and what the impact of that would be.
Thank you.
I agree.
Hey, Jeff, I hope I sound smart here, but I got a question. I'm looking at
Mr.
the
Gonzalez?
impact fee. Yeah.
We're having trouble hearing you, sir.
Oh, wait, I'm sorry. I keep forgetting my microphone. Sorry about that. I'm looking at the impact fees that Midland has, okay, and just for giggles here. And for service area A for a single family housing is $3,020. That would be a fee, that's a one-time fee that's going to be added to the cost of the house, right? So we can honestly say that if we take the $3,000 divided by 12 divided by 30 years, it's going to add about $8 to $10 more a month in impact, right, to the consumer.
Yeah, I mean, yes, yeah, that's correct.
Okay.
One thing I just want to clarify is that that's roadway impact fee only, that 3,020 that you're looking, if you're looking at their website, they also have water and wastewater.
So it could be more.
Yeah, it's roughly, the water and wastewater is roughly another $2,500 in Midland, 'cause I think their base meter is a 1-inch meter, so their base meter is a little bit higher.
So it'll be about $5,500 for a single family, right?
Yeah, in service area A that you're looking at. I think the average
Okay.
we showed on the slide was about $5,100 across the Midland. So roughly 5,100 for a single family home in
Okay.
Midland.
So it could possibly have an impact about $15 to $16 per month for, I guess, the consumer that buys a house.
Yeah, I haven't done a mortgage loan look at that, but I'm sure you've done the math. That sounds about right.
Okay. All right. I just wanted to kind of have an impact on how it would hit the end consumer. Okay. Okay. Thank you.
But yeah, if you haven't, if you want to look at homework or whatever, I think Midland's website, they have their rates up there pretty easily. They have a calculator worksheet you can look at, some tables. And I think that's what was just discussed. Lubbock's got something pretty similar to that as well. So you can kind of peruse on theirs. You can look at their ordinance. There's nothing, the main decisions that both Lubbock and Midland made is what we were talking about, was really about, when does the fee start? So like, when does the collection rate start? Like the date, the effective date. And the second decision they really made was, what is that rate for residential? What's that rate for non-residential? So when you start thinking about the numbers that you see, that they kind of split out to residential, non-residential. I'm just telling you their thought process to kind of help you along. Maybe that's really where they focused. The other thing I think it's important to remember, and I have not said this, I don't think we've said this for a while. If you're already in the development process, you're already platted, there is a 1-year grace period for impact fees. So whatever the effective date of the ordinance would be, by state law, impact fees can't be charged for a year. So that's just important to remember, is like those who are in the process that have final platted, there is a year grace period. And the concept behind that is if you're final platted, you're in the process of pulling your building permit, et cetera, et cetera. So. Those are great questions. Are there any others that y'all want to have clarified, or any other direction you want to give to Vanessa or myself to look into, to bring back to you on the March meeting?
I'm good.
Yep, I just hope we get all this, if Vanessa takes care of us, and she always does, but get us all this information at the same time.
Dr. Goetz, yeah, we'll try and get that together and send it out with sufficient time as soon as we get it, even if it's before the March meeting. And then, John, however you want to handle, whether you want them just to filter any additional topics that you guys may want clarified or additional information on, you can just send it over to us and we'll try and get all that together.
Yes, I think anybody on the committee that has any questions that come up, let's just send them directly to Farah or Vanessa, like we've been doing, and they will have that for us at our next meeting. And I wanted to look at that. That one is scheduled to be pretty serious in that discussing and formulate a written recommendation to the council on the impact fee. So if we don't feel as a committee we're ready to do that, we've got another meeting scheduled in April. But I would like to everybody to do their homework and certainly think about and analyze these numbers and understand what impact, no pun intended, what impact they're going to have on the community. They're going to have positive impacts from a ability to finance the growth in the community, and they're going to have some negative impacts, and we're going to hear about those from the development community and the finance community and Philly, the insurance community. I think everybody's going to have some input on that, but looking at how we've been financing things in the past, I don't think that can continue to work to the level it has. So we've got to come up with a mixture of other ways to do it, and certainly impact fees are one of those ways to do that. Are there any other questions, thoughts, comments, other directions, other information, anything anybody needs to be comfortable?
Mr. Chairman, I did want to point something out. I've been wanting to have Jeff and his group do an impact fee one-on-one, in particular for our newer council and as a refresher for our existing council. That has been on hold. As you know, Mr. Thompson has been out, and I felt it not in our interest to have that without him. So we've been waiting for him to come back. I spoke with him today, and I think he'll be back at the next full council meeting. And so my recommendation to staff was that we have that impact fee one-on-one at our March 2nd work session. Again, some of the newer council members have asked questions about impact fees. And so I want them to have a basis of understanding, if you will. That way, when you guys come back to them, my guess in pretty short order, they'll at least understand what it is and how it works and why we're looking at it.
Okay. Michael, and as I mentioned to you earlier, please notify us of that, and it'll be a virtual meeting. And I think it'd be beneficial if some of us attended or listened to that and got a flavor of where the council was headed in that after that presentation.
Yes, sir. Will do.
Thank you much.
And John, just to follow up on what Michael mentioned is shortly after, so at the very next council meeting after they receive the 101 session, we do plan on taking the CIAC's comments on the land use assumption and impact fee CIP to them and ask them to set the hearing for that.
Okay. I understand. Good. Thank you. Okay. Any other information, questions from anyone? If not, let's adjourn this meeting and do some homework, and we'll look forward to getting the information from Vanessa, and we'll continue to move forward with this consideration. A motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
Second. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Thank you all very much. Jeff and April, very, very informative, good presentation, and I think we got a lot out of it and a whole lot to digest.
Outstanding. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you.
Stay safe, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.